we could do a factoring review that I could stick online under today. And if you're having factoring issues with any of the different types, we can go back one more time and make sure that things are going okay, or at least you have the tools for it to be okay. So again, with factoring, if that's still getting you, remember, number one, no matter what it looks like at the start, our golden rule always takes effect, which is there anything to factor out? Is there anything they all have in common? And it has to be all of my terms, whether there's 2 or whether there's 3. Now here, I notice I could divide the 3 into all of those, so I would. Then I'd say, okay, now if I was doing the distributed property, what would need to be here? So I'd have 3 times something get to 3x squared. And I'd get the x squared in. So if I distribute it, I'd get that back. 3 times negative 2x would get me negative 6x. And 3 times 4 would get me 12. Now, would I still want to see if I could factor this? Yes. I can't. So sometimes it may be as simple as you take something out they have in common and that's it. Okay? That can happen. What if it doesn't? Okay. Then we break it up into a couple of pieces. If there are 2 terms that I have there, it can be one of 2 things. It could be just like this, where I say, hey, I can take a 4 out of each of those. Hey, those each have an x. And then I just, again, say I've already got the 4. Okay. X to get to x squared, I need another x. Okay. Here I got the x's, but 4 times what gets me to negative 20? And again, that may be as far as I can go. But if you see a 2-termer and they're both perfect squares, and if some of you are just kind of struggling at this point going, I don't know if those are perfect squares, that's an issue. Because perfect squares, something's not going to go away. So if you don't look at the numbers that I've got written in red right above problem B and see that as perfect squares, ooh, I can do this right away, that's something you want to start working with. Because again, it's just 1 squared and 2 squared and 3 squared and so on. And I'd said before, if you're pretty good up to 10, you're going to be in pretty good shape. If not, it's something we want to work at a little bit. So here, if I know my squares, I'm like, hey, there's 9, there's 49. And instead of having to try and do something fancy, I'm just going to go, okay, well, what do I times by itself to get 9? Oh, 3. Okay. What do I times by itself to get 49? Okay, 7. And this even helps me with the signs in the middle, because if I'm going to multiply to get negative 49, I got to have one of each. And the order doesn't matter. I could do minus and then plus, but it even goes fast. Now, if you try to do something else with this, that's going to be kind of hard. Okay, so basically I'm just saying we've got to know those squares to know that if a situation like this does make itself available, we can take advantage of it. If it's 3 terms, I'm still going to do my golden rule first, but all 3 of those don't have anything in common. So then in this case, no number in front of x squared, okay, I can do the diamond if I want to. Now, some of you are at a point that some of you want to write it out like this. Some of you are like, no, I can do it in my head. But either way, we're multiplying to get the number on the end. We're adding to get the number in the middle. But again, that only works if there's no number in front of x squared. So let's see what I can figure out for hints. Multiplying to a negative. We just got done talking about that. I got to have one of each. I also know my first part's going to be x. Okay, I got that part down. Here's the other thing I know. Since that middle sign is negative, out of the 2 numbers I get, means the negative number has to be the bigger one. Because if you add 2 numbers together, you keep the sign of the one that's bigger. Okay, so it's going to be this one. So I'm like, okay, multiply to 21, add to multiply to negative 21 and add to negative 4. Any ideas out there? Okay, 7 and 3. And here's the cool thing. I'm like, okay, 7 and 3 could be 4 apart with a sign change. 7 and 3. Well, how do I know the sign? Oh, yeah. The negative has to be the bigger one. Negative 7 plus 3. I owe somebody $7. I pay him 3 back. Still owe him 4. Negative times positive is negative. All right. 7, 3. Okay. Whether you do it this way or do it in your head, I don't care, but you still need to get down to the parentheses at the end. Okay, that's something that's going to be important to do. Now, what if the unthinkable happens, the ones we like to avoid, the ones that there's a ton of on that factoring review that I gave you? They don't have anything in common, and again, it's got to be all 3. I know I could take a 2 out of those, but it has to be every term there. Now what do I do? Well, I got 2 choices, basically. I can either look at the factors that are possible with my number on the ends until I find a combination that works just so that I can get the answer in the middle. I can do some guess and check. Or my other option is, and I'll show the guess and check in a minute, if you're more of a fan of the diamond, you can do the slide and divide that we've talked about before. Now, here's the one thing that can happen sometimes with slide and divide that some of you normally will come up to me with these questions. Well, okay, I don't know what multiplies to 120, so what do I do? I can show you what you do. And some of you are going to be like, really? And I'm going to be like, uh-huh. If you have no idea what multiplies to 120, we are going to bust out the old handy-dandy calculator, and we are going to go one by one. I'm not going to do 1 because we already know what that is. And I'm going to start dividing numbers in, starting with some of the smaller ones. And I'm going to start figuring out these pairs of numbers until I find one that either by adding or subtracting is going to get me 14 apart. And sometimes it'll go really fast and you'll find one right away. And sometimes it'll take a while. But this is when I talk about having number sense, okay? And if you struggle with dividing and stuff like that, this is something you may have to do. It's just the way it is. And I'm getting close because 5 and 24 could be 19 apart with one of each sign. So I'm getting close here. I'm almost there. Let's see, 6 and 20. 6 and 20, one of each sign. That's going to work because 20 minus 6 would be 14. Okay, so it took me a little while, but it wasn't like terrible. If I was timing myself, it probably took me a minute. So I get here and I go, okay, I know one's positive and one's negative. It's negative 120. I know the positive number's bigger because it's plus 14 when I add them. So if the bigger number is positive, and I can even check this by FOILing quick. X squared negative 6x plus 20, so 20 minus 6 is 14, and 20 times 6 is 120. Okay, but some of you that did this on the quiz, this is where you stopped. And I wrote on your paper, this isn't just slide, it's slide and divide. So, you're like, oh yeah, so I got to divide by that number in front. I got to divide by the 8. Okay, and that's the right next step. But again, some of you got a little stuck here. You said, well, 8 doesn't go into 20 evenly, and this doesn't either. So I'm just going to slide this back, and don't write this down, that's why I'm doing it on a note card. But I want us to be able to see this if we think about it later. And you wrote this and circled it and said, that's my answer. To which I said, now if you FOILed this, 8 times 8 would be 64x squared. Wait a minute, I only want 8x squared. That's 64x squared. Something's wrong here. This isn't working. So I go back and I'm like, oh yeah, I remember now. He said I got to reduce the fractions. Now, if reducing fractions is not your strength, you still have a backup plan. Every calculator has some sort of way of reducing this. Okay, I need it in simplest fraction form on each of these. And again, if you can do it in your head, great. And if not, it takes a little more time, but go to the calculator. If at this point, where it's totally reduced, now it still doesn't turn out nice, now you can take that number in the denominator and swing it back to the front. And when I was talking before about FOIL out your answer to see if it works, I mean that because every single one of these, you can make sure your answer's right. If I start to do FOIL, okay, so 2 times 4 would be 8x squared. That'd be negative 6x plus 20x and negative 15. Combine my like terms in the middle. And I get the same thing back that I had in the original problem. And again, it just comes down to the number sense of things. Is there a way to do it without that? Sure. I could make two sets of parentheses and kind of guess and check numbers back and forth. It's absolutely possible. I mean, instead of doing it this way, I could, like what I talked about here with the combos, I could sit here, and now I'm going to do it with a pen. I prefer that you would do it with a pencil probably, so it's not as messy. But you could say, okay, so I'm going to use 8x and 1x and 3 and 5. Okay. So I know one's positive and one's negative. So if I do 3 and 5, well, that's 40 and that's 3. That's not getting me to 14. Okay, that didn't work. What if I switch them? What if I put the 5 here and the 3 here? 24 and 5. Nope, doesn't get me to 14. Okay, that didn't work. So that combo didn't work. What if I try these? And you just start trying the combinations together, hoping that you're going to get something that works. 10 and 12 does not equal 14. You're like, ooh, I'm not really necessarily a big fan of this, Mr. H. Well, 20 and 6, ooh, 14. 20 and 6, okay. I want the 20 to be positive and that to be negative, and I get to the right answer. So you've got options. You do, you do, you do. But if your times multiplying and figuring out factors is not your strength, I would probably go back to slide and divide and using the calculator to find my combinations. Okay. That's what I would do as far as the factoring problems go. Because you know just by looking at your review how many factoring questions there's going to be. So it's just something that you got to be able to keep track of.